Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who helped shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. The website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for this show, but if we pretended that we did, today's sponsor would be high school art teachers. Mary K VanGieson, our guest for today, was a high school art teacher for decades here in Memphis and shaped countless lives. I know many of her former students personally, and I know what an important teacher she was. And there's a beautiful part of the interview where I asked her what it was that she liked about teaching. And it's this wonderful thing where she describes being there when the light turns on or when the students light up. It's such a beautiful moment in the life of a teacher, and I'm so thankful that Mary K VanGieson sat down with me to do this interview. Now, this interview is the first of two interviews that I recorded with Mary K. This one was recorded on March 30th, 2024. Enjoy the interview. Will you tell me a little bit about your earliest memories of art?
I can do that. So when I was in kindergarten at age 5, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I lived, I walked to and from school, which was 8-9 blocks, all by myself, which you would never do today. Never do today. But this was another time, another place. And they were doing construction on the street. So on the way home, I stepped in the mud up to about my knees. So upset. Oh my gosh. So I was crying. And as I was walking along and crying, the construction worker said, "Oh, don't worry, little girl. It'll be fine. It'll wash off. It'll be fine." The trouble was I wasn't crying about the mud. I was crying about the picture that I had drawn in class, kindergarten class, that was as a person, and I had followed the teacher's directions exactly, but my picture didn't look like hers, and I was really upset. So that's the first art remembrance that I can think of.
Okay, now can you remember how you deviated from the path, or was it just a matter of like, this person's been doing it for 40 years and this is my first time doing it?
Wait, I'm not sure I understand the question.
I know that's one of the things that this interview process is definitely making me do better. Sometimes I'll just be like, blah, 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 blah,
deviate
blah.
from...
Well, so like you were saying that you did not like your drawing
no.
as much as the teachers. And do you think it was that you just had not had the practice, the
I was
muscle
5.
memory? Yeah, you were 5, yeah. But now do you remember...
I remember exactly how she drew it.
Okay, yeah.
So, circle for head, triangle, square. I did all that perfectly.
Right.
But it didn't look like hers. It wasn't as good. It really made me upset.
Now, what about, was drawing something that you'd like to do, or was this just the first instance?
I always drew, but I don't remember anything. I mean, that's the first memory I have of making a picture that, was well received or not.
Right. And then what kind of things did you like to draw when you were a kid?
I don't remember particularly. We had cats, so I probably worked at cats. I took a magazine called Jack and Jill.
Yeah.
I might still be able to find that. I don't know. And I would, every time that would come in, I would sit down and I would make those craft projects as perfectly as I could. A little friend one time told me, "Oh, Mary Kay, you should get a job making these examples because you're so good at it." And I can remember thinking at the time, I'd rather create the examples of myself rather than copy somebody else's stuff. I can remember thinking that. So.
Now, when you were growing up, did you have siblings? I can't remember.
I have a younger sister. She's
Okay.
4 years younger.
Okay. And then what about in the home? Were your folks interested in art? No, not at all.
Not at all. Now, my dad was a draftsman, so that's artistic.
Wait, I love how you're like, no, not at all. My
Well-
dad drew for a living.
Yeah, but his was all about lines and figures and, protractors and rulers and, stuff to build things from. So, it wasn't like fine art. In fact, we never went to museums. Looking back, I think there weren't too many museums in Tulsa, Oklahoma at the time, so not much opportunity to go to those. Now, my mother was crafty. So my dad could do anything. I mean, he could build things, he could repair things, he could fix the car, he could fix clocks, he could do all that stuff. Add a room onto the house, install heating and air conditioning. I mean, he could do all that stuff. My mom, for the most of my growing up, was a housewife, but she had a degree in economics, in food service, not food service, but home economics. So she did those kinds of, the food was on the table as soon as Daddy walked in the door, and those kinds of things. But she was real crafty as far as, and she taught me to sew. So I had all the mechanical tools and so forth from my dad, and the sewing and the crafty kind of things from my mom. So there was that kind of art.
That's interesting. So what kind of things was your mom crafting?
Oh, there were like toll painting platters and lace and sewing kinds of things and that kind of stuff.
Now, what about in the house? I mean, obviously, the crafty things that your mom's making, those are around the house. What about, was there other kinds of art? Were there other people in your parents' lives who were artists?
No. We had a painting over the couch that was mostly green, maybe not covered with plastic, although sometimes in my memory I think about that. You know how they used to encase things in plastic? Robert Woods comes to mind as the artist. It was a print. Looking back on it, it's really awful to my mind now.
Now, what about at school? Like after this traumatic event with the circle and the triangle and the square, how did it go from there? Was it one of those things where you were like, I'm never doing this again? Or...
Oh, no. I always was arty, always, And I was called on to do arty kinds of things, And I would decorate a folder to put my English notes in and get some extra credit points because I had made a really brilliant illustration on the cover. So, so that was worthwhile. So, I didn't join any groups. There really weren't too many kinds of groups until I got to high school for art.
But they were teaching art all through
elementary. Oh yeah.
Now, was that something that was encouraged at the house? Like, they were like, oh, Mary Kay likes doing this. We're gonna get sketchbooks and color, like the usual thing where there's.
Not really, but I wasn't discouraged from doing it either. So later, when I decided to go into art as a major in college, I think my parents both held their breath that I was going to live with them forever. Excuse me. But they said, fine. So, and they footed the bill. So that was the way it went.
Okay, so let's back up. So you were saying the first time you were in kind of a club or something where you were around other art weirdos was in high school. What do you remember about that experience?
So we weren't so weird back in the 60s. I mean, some of us were, but this was Oklahoma. You have to remember, we're pretty conservative. And so, we've been on sketch trips and stuff, not nearly as active as I did with my art students, while I was teaching. But we did some stuff, and we did things for the school, and there were a mural or two and those kinds of things. So it was an active club, but it was also something that I think our advisor had to do as per on his contract, so that happens still.
It was funny the other day. Brittany Boyd Bullock came and gave a talk for my professional practices class, and she would do this really funny thing every once in a while. In the talk, she would say, "Timestamp 2016," and then she would talk about 2016, and then she would kind of move on, and then she'd be like, "Timestamp 2019," and then she would talk about the stuff that happened in 2019, and it was such a great thing. And so it's one of those things that's in my head now because it happened. I guess it was last week or whatever.
Not sure anyway, I could do that.
I know, right? But what do you think? So we're talking about, like you said, high school. That's in the 1960s.
Right.
What year was it that you graduated from high school?
62.
Okay.
So.
And then, so you're in Oklahoma then.
I am.
What kinds of things are happening? I mean, one of the things that I'm also really interested in this is that so often when we talk about art, it's like art happens on this little tiny island and nothing else that happens in the world really has anything to do with it, But of course, I'm talking to people who lived through really sort of monumental shifts in culture and society.
Right.
And so, like, when you were in high school, what did you remember about the larger world?
So the Vietnam War was ramping up. Periodically and really quite often, the whole school, which it was a big school, there were 450 in my graduating class. It was a big school. So the whole school would be evacuated because there'd been a bomb threat. Now, to my knowledge, they never found a bomb, but I don't know that they didn't find a bomb. But that happened frequently. So everybody talk about terrorists and all this kind of stuff. So it was presumably, we thought, to protest the war in Vietnam. I don't know how that really helps, but, maybe. But that was something that was going on then. So.
And so you were taking art classes there in Tulsa, and you were saying you were talking about the stuff that you were doing that felt more curricular or like some kind of a mandate. One of the things that comes up a lot in these interviews that I've been doing is how people will talk about art, the high school art experience, and how that room was kind of a place where we as artists kind of found our people, and we also had other artists who were there with us in that room, and it was kind of a safe space. Was that the case with you?
Kind of. I mean, a lot of my friends were art people. I mean, since then and forever. But the teachers might have been artists in their own. We didn't know too much about them. So there wasn't my best friend is my teacher kind of thing. That wasn't never present. It was kind of interesting that, so my high school was 10, 11, and 12. I went to junior high prior to that. So the 10th grade art teacher got a student pregnant and was fired. So that happened. So, And then the teacher that I had for the second year, she'd broken her leg, and I don't think she ever moved from her chair at the front of the room. The third year was a man named Mr. Parker, who was awesome. Now, he was really awesome. He later married one of his students, so there was a lot of that going on in conservative Oklahoma. But he was great. And later, as a teacher, I used some of those projects that I had done in his classroom for my own students, which that's kind of strange.
Mm-hmm.
But
no, what kind of things do you feel like made him great, or what were some of the things that he did that made him really stand out for you?
So he had really nice projects that brought out the best of it in his students, which I think is really important. But he was personable too. Not my best friend, but obviously was with the senior that he married. But you could talk to him and you could ask him questions, and he would give you straight answers, and that kind of thing. So he was a good guy. He was a good guy. I enjoyed him. Now the other two, the woman, can't remember her name, but anyway, she gave me a great recommendation for college, but she really didn't know me. So
now, another reason that I'm interested in doing this project is, of course, stealing good ideas.
Right.
And so can you think of some good projects that Mr. Parker, is that his name?
Yeah.
Some good projects that Mr. Parker had in your high school brain that you thought, oh, man, this is a cool project?
So he brought in popcorn. and we all chose a piece of popcorn after we ate several dozen, and then we blew it up large on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, drawing paper, and then we practiced our technique of pointillism, cross-hatching, hatching on 3 different popcorns. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty awesome. Mine looked really good, too.
So now, at this point, you've become confident and strong in your art skills. And so, was it just one of those things where it was a kind of gradual thing, or was it one of those things where you would work on drawings and making things outside of school?
Not too much outside school. I mean, we didn't have homework in art, so I didn't keep a sketchbook, which was really wrong. I mean, it should have been keeping a sketchbook. But I wasn't encouraged to do that either. So for an English class, we had to apply to this competition. What is a librarian competition? That was, and that was done out of class. So you could write a poem or an essay, or you could make a drawing. Well, shoot. I made a little watercolor of the little girl peering over the librarian's desk and getting a book and so forth. And my mother said, you might need to work on the perspective of the librarian's arm. I said, psst, it's just for a grade. I'll get an A, which I did. But I won the statewide contest, too. And so the big celebration was at Oklahoma State University, where I ended up going to school. And I talked in front of this whole group of librarians, and, they paid for the weekend and so forth. And then they used that painting that I made on all their flyers for the Librarian Association for the whole state. Pretty sure I didn't get compensated for that, but that was okay, too.
So you ended up going to Oklahoma State.
I did.
And you knew when you applied and when you headed there that art was going to be the thing that you would study.
Yeah.
And you were saying your parents were a little bit reluctant about it. And how did they voice that?
So here's kind of a funny thing. So I said to my parents at one point, I might like to go to art school. Well, my mother was very frugal, very frugal. That was going to cost a lot of money. State-supported school, really cheap at the time. So we all piled in the car, and we drove to Kansas City, to the Kansas City Art Institute, which was the only one around. But she also didn't call ahead to make an appointment because a long-distance call would have cost money, and my mother was very frugal. School was closed. We drove around the perimeter, and my dad never liked to drive in cities, so he was like, and then we turned around and went home. And that semester then, at the end of the year, I enrolled at Oklahoma State University. So there you go.
Now, where is OSU?
It's in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
Okay, is that pretty close to Tulsa?
A couple hours.
Oh,
a couple
okay.
hours. Yeah,
Okay.
No, not far away.
Okay, but that was, that was a huge step, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it was. I had not. Well, I'd lived. Summers I worked in Colorado, but that was the first living away.
And what were you doing in Colorado?
I was a server. I was a painter of cabins at the YMCA Camp of the Rockies in Estes Park, Colorado, for the summer. I did a lot of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
all by myself. So I didn't have a car, couldn't fly, too expensive. But I took a bus, 2-day bus trip to Colorado. And that's how I got there. And then I stayed the summer. So my parents came and picked me up. They took some kind of a vacation, I guess, to come pick me up. So
you were clearly
I was on my own.
Pretty independent.
I was.
Yeah.
I was.
And so going to Stillwater wasn't a huge deal.
It was close enough. I still didn't have a car, though. I didn't have a car until I was a senior in college.
Right.
So.
Now, tell me about, I don't know anything about Oklahoma State. Tell me about that transition from being there in Tulsa to Stillwater.
So Oklahoma State University was an agriculture and mechanical college, and then they changed. And, it was university, and we were always second in football behind Oklahoma University, totally different places. Go Cowboys kind of thing. I did join a sorority, which was great. That was great for me. So I had a whole, selection of friends. I was the only art major in the sorority house, lived in the sorority house. So I got to do all the art projects, to design a house decoration for homecoming kind of thing, Here, do calligraphy on all these 42 million names, stuff. So, but no, it was great. Now, have I kept up with them since then? Nope. I do have some friends still from that time.
Yeah.
But
no, what about the class situation there? Like in terms of thinking about what you were doing and what you were taking.
So Oklahoma State University at that time was not the cultural center of the universe, not at all. The art department was situated on the 4th floor of a building which was primarily science, biology. Used to walk up those flights of stairs, and I would pass students from the biology lab coming down with their plastic bags with their dead cats in them, which they were cutting into for class. So that was weird. It was very small. Now they've built a whole big complex and whole big complex and have a gallery. There was no gallery. There was no nothing. It was just classrooms and various teachers. Most of the teachers, though, were pretty good in retrospect. I mean, I think they really were quite good. Not quite sure why they were at Oklahoma State University, but, they did okay. One guy taught a 3D design class, and his own work was kinetic sculpture. We went to his studio, which was round, and all these wonderful things were happening based on music and sound and music and so forth. He was great. He was great. So.
Now, I mean, typically when you make that transition from high school to college, regardless of the city or anything like that, there's a huge shift in terms of what's possible and huge shift in terms of what's talked about. So when you made that transition to Oklahoma State and you started taking art classes there, was it one of those things where you felt like you were pretty prepared, you were pretty up to speed, or was there a lot of catching up to do?
No, I was pretty prepared. I was kind of an A personality, still probably am, an A personality person, so I worked at it. I mean, I worked hard. Back in the day, then, abstract expressionism was all the rage. So in the painting classes, you built your canvas, you had it in front of you, you had your paints. If you didn't start painting immediately, the teacher might come around and put a swash of yellow paint right in the middle of your... So it's ruined now, Mary Kay, so you might as well get going. But it was all intuitive. So there was no, think of a running river or a waterfall or people in the coffee shop, or, there was none of that. There was paint. And then somebody would come around and say, put more yellow here, put more green here, maybe some texture, So it was kind of, there wasn't a whole lot of teaching going on. So
now, when I was making that transition from high school to college, I mean, in part there was sort of this almost like a purgatory for me because I was there as a biology major, but then I slowly sort of shifted to art.
You would have enjoyed the 3rd floor of the art building.
Well, when I was at U of M, it was ROTC people who were on there, and I can't imagine a worse combo. But I didn't know anything about contemporary art when I was in high school or even when I was in college. I didn't really know anything about that stuff until I was taking art history classes and things like that. Was contemporary art on your radar in some way other than school?
So no, but now you have to remember I graduated in 1966. So, and it was Oklahoma. Everything happens on the coast, and by the time it filters into the middle, we've all moved on. So that was difficult. I was thinking about so I took 7 semesters of art history, taught by the same guy, who talked like he had mush in his mouth at the back of the room at 7 o'clock in the morning in this hallway. It was awful. It was really awful. I learned next to nothing. And everything that wasn't projected on the screen was on the test. So it was one of those things. But it was so there was what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought.
That's
Sorry.
okay. So we were talking about how aware of contemporary art you were.
So not very aware at all. Anything that I did was on my own, and that meant going to the library. So, but the book that we had, Contemporary Modern Art by Canaday, I think, listed 2 women artists in it.
In the whole book.
In the whole book.
Yeah.
In the whole book. So I asked at one point, this man who sat at the back of the room with mush in his mouth, I asked him, I said, why are there no women in this book? Well, he said, they didn't have access to, I said, it's contemporary art. I mean, I could understand in the first book by Jansen or whoever that was, Arneson, but this is contemporary art. Have there not been any women artists? Well, but I mean, his idea was that a woman couldn't possibly because she wasn't bright enough. So there was that.
And that was something that you were aware of at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Now, was the inclusion of women in other classes, was that something that you had noticed, like, for example, in literature or in history? Or was it one of those things where you were just like, man, this is really glaring in this art history class?
So, well, the book was glaring, but there were lots of women in the class. Lots of women in all the classes. I don't remember anything like that. Now, had I gone on to take biological science for the 3rd and the 4th, whatever year, I might have noticed a difference. Or architecture, any of that stuff was pretty male-dominated, obviously.
Now, we were doing the timestamp thing, so timestamp mid-60s, and so here you are raising this question. I'm surprised that question wasn't one that had been raised before.
It probably had been, but not by me.
Right. Well, no, I mean, but for this teacher, I mean, but then again, maybe this teacher was, though...
Well, he was really bad.
Yeah, on the rails and eating his oatmeal.
So we always laugh because if he was late to class, we figured he was hungover, and so we could all leave, So that was great. Which might have been true. So. But 7 semesters of that. I did do an independent study where I wrote a paper, which was really well received. And I did lots of research to do that. Something about time and art. I don't remember. But those 7 semesters of art history, pretty much a waste of time. I mean, I really didn't learn that much. There was a whole semester on rose windows. And if you've seen a couple of rose windows, you've pretty much seen them all. So.
Now, you were saying before that most of the stuff that you were exposed to or that you were really seeing was in the library. What was that setup like?
Oh, it was a wonderful library. It was huge and it was fabulous. We had the card catalog back in the day, and the whole big section on art. I mean, it was great. It was great.
Now, what kind of things do you remember seeing then?
Seeing...
In the books? Like, what were some things that were getting you excited?
Well, there were Picasso, of course, all the guys, not any women too much. So earlier, I had discovered Brancusi, and the first sculpture that I could not believe my eyes, it was so wonderful, and this is probably in high school, was Brancusi's Bird in Space, which is awesome, still, to me. There's a wonderful exhibition of Brancusi's work at the Philadelphia Art Museum. It's wonderful. So I was so taken with that particular sculpture, and that carried on. So here I thought of myself as a painter, but I always admired all the object makers. So
now, what was it I mean, pretend I'm not a big Brancusi fan. I am. I love Brancusi.
Okay.
But like, give me give me the case for this particular piece. What was it about it that moved you? You think?
So, just the look of it, that it was shiny, that it was so simplified, so just like an impression of this bird in space kind of thing, you know. And also the story that I heard, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure, but when it was brought, I think Brancusi was Romanian. Anyway, when the piece was brought to the United States, they put it down and charged the duty on it as hardware. And I was just taken aback by that. Oh my gosh, this gorgeous thing, and you're going to call it hardware? So wrenches and bolts and nuts and Brancusi, oh my gosh. Now, I don't know how real that is.
Now, how did Brancusi get on your radar? How did you?
You know, I don't remember.
Especially since you said it was high school.
It was. And it must have been a picture that I saw. You know, there wasn't that much on TV that would have been of an art value particularly. So I probably saw a picture or something, and then maybe I went to the library and researched it and discovered him and read about him and that cute little, you know, hardware thing. So, yeah. Yeah.
Now,
I still like Brancusi, as a
me
matter
too.
of fact.
Me too. Now, those images, did that lead you on did that begin a trail for you? Like, was that a beginning of additional research, like finding this one thing where you like, oh, let's see what else this person's done?
I did, as far as that goes. But in my own personal work and classes and so forth, I still thought of myself as a two-dimensional artist, painter, you know. I mean, I didn't know that much about, my teacher who did kinetic sculpture, yes, 3D design class, that was great. But as far as making my own art, I thought of myself as a painter. So I never did do much in the way of sculpture outside of class.
Now, what was it that attracted you to painting? What was it that got you excited about it?
Well, I got good grades. No, I loved, we were painting in oil. So I loved the oil. I loved the smell. I loved the way the art room, the lab smelled of oil paint. I liked abstract expressionists. It was, you know, colors and shapes and texture and so forth. That was awesome. And I kept getting an A, so, you know, that was okay. So I remember some kid came up to me one day and says, "So what are you doing that's so awesome? Because I understand you're setting the curve in this class." And I went, "I don't know. I just paint."
Well, I mean, part of me thinks, yeah, of course. You know, like you've got your subdued sense of self. You know, you've got your Mary Kay ego that's in check. You know, you're not out of control over there. But what did you think? Like, what was it that you were doing?
So in the paintings, what kinds of paintings was I making?
Yeah, what were you doing that was setting this curve?
They were totally, I don't know. They were totally...
Yes, you do. Come
on. So no figures. We didn't do figures back then in these classes. No figures, no landscapes, none of this. It was all just color and shape and texture and big, good size, because that's all bigger's better. So. And all in that luscious oil paint, which I loved then, still love today. Do-it-yourself canvases, you know, made those back at the sorority house down in the basement, primed them, dragged them over to class.
So do you think it was really your willingness to play by the rules of the time? Like you were saying, no landscapes, no figures, abstract expressionism, and then also kind of driven by this love of the materiality of the paint. And then also, it sounds like a lot of what you're talking about is a kind of intuitive process.
I think it was pretty intuitive. Now, had drawing classes, and there were models, and so I could have done figural kinds of work. But you got the idea that really wasn't what I was supposed to do in this abstract expressionist class. They didn't call it that. But we had figure drawing, life drawing classes. Now, Oklahoma State University, very conservative, public, you know, state-supported school, no nude models. Oh my goodness, no nude models, heaven forbid. So all the models were clothed, Little skinny women, heftier women, and then and they had bikinis. Now, not a lot left to the imagination, but they did have clothes on. But then the guys came in, and a lot of these guys were wrestlers. Oklahoma State University at the time was quite a wrestling school. So they hired wrestlers to come in and model. But they didn't strip down. They only took their shirts off. They didn't take their pants off. They didn't put a swimsuit on. It was just all about the upper torso and the muscles. But I learned how to draw the figure a bit with some clothes on too. So.
And was that something that you were good at?
Oh yeah.
And
still am kind of.
Was it a thing? Was it a thing that felt kind of natural to you in the same way that the abstraction felt like it was a kind of intuitive process, or was it a different part of your brain?
I just drew. I remember one time this woman, I think she was older, which later I became older, but she was auditing the class, I think. And she was having an awful time getting the sweep of the breast right on this female model. And so the poor instructor, he had a ruler, and he was trying to show how, it just didn't go poking out. And I thought to myself, I remember thinking, can you not see, woman? Can you not see what's right in front of your face? So I guess I had a way of looking that was art inclined. I don't know.
Now, for me, the way I was exposed to a lot of contemporary art history was through the art classroom. Like I remember Dick Knowles would bring in, this is not contemporary, but at least moderns. He would bring in the Egon Schiele drawings, and he would bring in these other drawings, and we would either look at the books or we would look at slides. And same with Larry's class, and same with these other classes that I had taken. Was that the case for you too? Were those teachers exposing you to things that you had not seen before?
So in college, undergraduate, no, not really. I'd pretty much seen most of what was in that first book, and then, like I said, the second book, they stopped with the Impressionists, so I'd seen that too. And mostly on my own. Now, when I did graduate work, I took a class with Dick Knowles on contemporary art, and that was a whole. I'd missed out. I hadn't even learned half these people, even though I'd been teaching for years and years. So I caught up in a hurry.
And so, thinking about being there at Oklahoma State, and so again, you're there throughout the mid-'60s. What was the climate like? You were talking about high school and having these bomb threats in high school. What about in college? What was the atmosphere there like then?
Well, we marched. The president was killed, assassinated during that time. But we marched. I did. Much to the dismay of the alumna for the sorority I belonged to. Oh my gosh, was that actually Mary Kay, the president of our sorority, marching with all those folks in support of Martin Luther King Jr.? What? Was she there? I wasn't supposed to do that, but I did.
And then, just out of curiosity, obviously in 2024 that makes perfect sense, but obviously back then it did not. And so, but what was it about that made sense in your brain?
Well, I had friends who agreed that everybody should have equal opportunities, and here was all this going on, so we marched thinking that Oklahoma State University in the middle of Oklahoma might make a difference. I'm not sure it did. Like I said, very conservative school. So that was a kind of a big thing. I was on TV. My dad called me and he said, "What are you thinking of?" Because I was in this situation. Now, I think he was thinking about my safety. Mm-hmm. But back then, there wasn't going to be a riot of people on the other side attacking us. So, those folks, I guess, stayed home. I don't know what they did. So. Yeah.
Now, what about the school there at Oklahoma State? Was it integrated at the time?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
But most of the black and brown people on campus were from other countries. You see. So you had a lot of exchange students, a lot of people in engineering, in home economics, both big schools, in agriculture, a big school too. So not so much in art.
Now, I mean, of course, you mentioned Tulsa, and then here we are talking about civil rights. Now, was the Tulsa
The massacre.
Was that
That
on
was
your...
years before.
Right. But
Right.
was it on your radar?
Nope.
Yeah.
Not a clue.
Yeah.
And I think about that now, because it was years after I left Tulsa before I even knew anything about that. It was not taught in school. It was not part of our history, Oklahoma history. I mean, we talked about the 5 civilized tribes. It never occurred to anybody who named them civilized, so that was weird. My dad, however, at the time was working as a draftsman on the edge of Greenwood, which was the Black Wall Street, and which they burned down. So now that had happened years before, and they'd rebuilt, not as black businesses, but and so surely he knew about that, but it never came up. It never came up at the house. It should have, but it never did.
And then, just to backtrack a little bit, where do you think this awareness came from? Like you were saying, in college, you had friends who were also thinking about this.
Yeah.
Was politics? Was that one of the things that was talked about at all in the house when you were growing up?
Yeah, not tons. I mean, everybody got excited when they could vote for the first time. And there was talk about this and that. So growing up, my mom was a Republican, my dad was a Democrat. We didn't talk about politics at home because they pretty much canceled each other out. I remember my mother being really, really, really upset when Truman was elected. She thought he was awful, mainly because he had bad language. So, he said damn in hell. So that was probably her primary concern. But so not much talk. And in the sorority house, we didn't have any big political discussions as far as I can remember. So, now this is not political, but in the art department there were gay students, and they were in my classes and so forth, and that was fine. Actually, some of it we hung out with them and so forth. So there were a lot of people that were in the closet, but that was not something that the alumna would have thought, worthwhile to have somebody at the house who was gay. So, like I said, conservative.
Right, that makes sense. And so all this time you're going to school for art. What kind of things were you, like you were saying, you were sort of setting the curve with these abstract expressionist paintings.
Yep.
What other kind of things were you making? What else do you remember about the things that you made?
So there were a printmaking class. It was awesome. The teacher was really, really good. I liked the three-dimensional, the 3D design class. That was great too. So I made all these prints, so etchings, and I still have some of those. They're not bad, early work.
Now, some people...
They're not bad.
Some people gravitate towards printmaking, and some people do not.
I love printmaking.
What was it about it that clicked for you?
Well, so later on I learned about monotypes and monoprints, and that's so immediate. So that was fun. Etching and all that kind of thing. That takes a lot of time and equipment and so forth. But a monotype, you can do that on anything. And that's what I taught my students too, was monotypes and so forth. We had a press, but yeah.
So when you were there at Oklahoma State, what was the printmaking setup like?
Well, it was a room about twice this size.
We're in a very small room.
Oh yeah, and it was a very small room. So later, when I was at the University of Memphis, I would go over in the evenings and work in the labs and so forth, and had a studio and everything over there. But I didn't really go to the art labs when I was an undergraduate at Oklahoma State. Stuff going on, dating, whatever, hanging out.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it sounded like you had a busy life outside of school.
I did.
Now, what about like thinking about people who were there with you? Were there people in the art community or people in the school itself that you had strong bonds with?
Several. Now, I haven't kept up with them, so I don't know what they're doing these days. But there were several.
And what about the city itself? What was going on? Did Stillwater have did it have exhibition spaces?
No.
Did the university have exhibition spaces? So there was very little.
Very
What
little.
about a museum? Did they have a museum? No. Oh, okay.
Maybe now, I don't know. I
Okay.
haven't been back in years and years.
Okay.
So I know the university now has a whole complex for the visual arts, including a space because they asked me to donate, which I did, that kind of thing. Hit up all the alumni. And I think it's pretty awesome, actually. I have not seen it. But back then, the arts, the visual arts, that was kind of the poor stepchild, so we didn't do that too much. So yeah.
And so, what did you graduate with? Was it a BFA?
So that's a whole nother story. So here I was, second semester junior, and I had fallen in love. We were going to get married as soon as I graduated. Well, then he was going to photography school in California. How was he going to live? How were we going to live? So I changed my major from a fine arts major in painting to art education. Never wanted to be a teacher, never ever wanted to do that, but if you're in love, you do certain things. So that's what I did. And my parents, they didn't say a word, but you knew that they breathed a sigh of relief. She's going to have a job.
Now,
So I graduated with a BFA. I mean, a BAE. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Now, you were saying that this was a thing that you were kind of thinking about for financial security and things like that.
Only.
Was there something else? Was there anything else about the curriculum that appealed to you that you got
The art
excited
education?
about? Yeah.
No. No, nothing at all.
Now, the reason I'm laughing is that, of course, I know
No.
that you taught for
I did.
a million years.
And I was great.
Yeah.
Actually, I was really pretty good.
I know. But what surprises me is that, here you are, this sort of legendary teacher, and then you're like, no.
I had no preparation
no
whatsoever.
interest in that at all.
No preparation.
Okay.
I had to take. So I was late changing my major to that anyway. Everybody was like, "What? No, you can't do." My advisor said, "What?" So I took philosophy of education. I took something education. I took a class. It was a 5-hour class on, I don't know what it was called, but basically it was, here's a lesson plan, now make an example. Loved that. Why, I just whipped those out all the time. Most of the people in the class were elementary education majors, and here I was probably the lone previously art major, and now I was going to go into art education. So that was easy street. No big deal. Got an A in that one too. So if I was working for the grade, no, but I kind of enjoyed that. But that philosophy of education and that whatever methods and bad, and it didn't prepare me at all. In fact, the first teaching job I got was elementary school, and I thought, okay, I've gotten this job. Now what do I do? I had no clue. So I had to look back on this book that we'd been given for one of those classes, I guess that methods class, and it was edition 1, of which there are probably 6 editions now, or 10 or 12 maybe, I don't know. But I used that as my, guide to teaching elementary art, and the library, of course.
And so did you end up going to California?
I did.
Okay.
I mean, we did.
Where were you in California?
So Santa Barbara, awesome place, beautiful, beautiful, loved it. So I tried to get a teaching job. They offered me one at the high school, but those kids were, 2, 3 years older. I mean, younger than I was. It was the '60s in California. Drugs were all over the place. I would have to go back to school because they graduated on a 5-year system. I didn't have enough credits to be certified. So I'd have to go back. So teaching and going back to school, we didn't plan to stay in California forever. And I said no. So I didn't do that. So I'd applied a lot of places for commercial artwork. See, I thought I was going to be a commercial artist. So, I applied a lot of places and so forth. One of the places I applied was General Telephone. And I ended up being a drafting clerk at General Telephone.
Now, what was your partner doing at the time? Was he going to...
He was going to school. So he was on the GI Bill. So his tuition and so forth was paid for. And he was working part-time in a liquor store. So... So between my full-time job at General Telephone and making maps of poles and lines and so forth, and his part-time job, we did pretty well.
Now, what was Santa Barbara like at the time? Like you were talking about the high school kids being crazy, but what about was there art there? Was there something going on there that was also interesting, or were you just mostly head down, concentrating on the telephone poles?
Yeah. But I mean, the ocean is beautiful. The sunsets were gorgeous. Fog, I'd never realized that fog actually rolled in off the ocean onto the land. I came from Oklahoma, for Pete's sakes. So the whole, I mean, it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. There had been, just before we got there was an oil spill. Now, offshore, you could see all these oil derricks that looked like ships all lit up. They were beautiful. But of course, they were on a fault. I mean, there's a fault there, So, but there'd been an oil spill. So everybody was all concerned about the flora and the fauna and the ocean and the whatever. And you'd walk on the beach and your feet would be all covered with oil. So that was a big deal. Continues to be for various places a big deal.
Now, your partner was going to grad school.
No.
Oh,
well,
undergrad.
So he went to Brooks Institute of Photography, in it's no longer there, which is sad, which was one of the two or three maybe major photography schools in the country. So he had finished most of his credits for an undergraduate degree. This was, this was simply photography. So he later got the final, he got a bachelor's later.
Now, were y'all married at the time?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Heaven forbid.
Right. Well, that's why I was asking.
We have to do this the normal way,
Of course. Okay, so
the 60s way.
You move out there, and then that must have also been a radical cultural shift.
Yes, because hippies were the norm. Everybody was smoking pot and doing LSD, and I mean, it was a pretty crazy time. So we loaded up the U-Haul trailer. I had a 1956 Chevy, which was 10 years old at the time, 10, whatever it was. And we loaded up all the wedding presents in the U-Haul, and we drove across the country. We didn't know anybody. We didn't have a place to live. He'd been accepted into school, and that was it.
Wow. Now, was the photography school there, was it like an art photography school, or was it more like photojournalism or commercial photography?
They had a little of all that. So he had various semesters of, photojournalism, of product photography, of all sorts of different things, figures, portraits, shoot a gun and capture the gun splitting the apple, or kind of thing on film.
Okay.
Which is kind of cool.
And was that Was that one of those situations where you were also exposed to a lot of what was happening at the school, or was it pretty separate? Like
It was pretty separate.
He would go
It was
there,
pretty-
and
yeah,
you would be over here with the telephone.
Well,
calls.
all his friends were at the house all the time, so I got a lot of that, And we went to movies. 2001: A Space Odyssey. I swear we must have seen that 7 times. Hate that movie. Hate it, because there was always with narration. Oh, watch this transition, or or did you see that cut? It's like the movie.
Okay, so how long were you there in California?
3 years.
Okay, and you mostly worked as a draftsperson there.
I did.
Then,
I did.
And then where'd you go after that?
So I would have stayed in California. Frankly, I would have stayed in California, but my husband was pretty conservative too, and he decided that people were way too weird for him, way too weird. Also, photographers in the area, a dime a dozen. I mean, a dime a dozen, really. So we drew a 500-mile circle around Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he applied to all the major cities in that, and we moved to St. Louis.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Now, what was going on in St. Louis? I mean, and so again, timestamp. Now we're at 1969. Early 1970?
About, yeah, 70.
Cool. Okay. And so you're making that transition again from California,
Yep.
crazy
This
land.
time we had 2 U-Haul trailers and 2 cats. So, just to get everything in perspective.
And so was it just that your husband got a job there in St. Louis?
He did.
No, what kind of job was it?
So it was with a small company. He was doing photographic work for catalogs and so forth. He didn't like it. I got a job in commercial art. They ran out of stuff for me to do, and I was doing paste up work, which they do on computers now. That was awful. Nice people. But he, really awful job, the worst. But he really wanted to work for Merits Incorporated, which is a incentives corporation, still in business. And eventually that's who he went with. So I was working at this horrible job, but then I worked for the Sporting News as a commercial artist. That was kind of cool. But then I decided maybe I should try teaching. All this time I'd never taught. So I interviewed, and I was accepted in an elementary school, and I taught for the next 5 years. It was kind of funny that the guy that had hired me at the Sporting News, he said, if I'd known what BAE stood for, Bachelor of Art Education, I never would have hired you.
Now, where was it that you were teaching in St. Louis?
Elementary.
No, but what was the name of the school? You remember?
Oh, Ladue. It was fancy school. I mean, it was public school, but it was fancy. So I went into the interview, and, I was chatting with the folks, and I saw this janitor-looking person come in, and he sat down with us, and I thought, who in the world? What? It turned out to be my principal, so really, really wonderful guy.
Was it just that he was kind of disheveled and?
Well, he had on like overalls and kind of stuff. I think he'd been working in the garden. It was the summertime, but he was awesome, and he helped me out a lot. So never thought I wanted to teach, but discovered it was kind of cool, and I liked those kids.
What was cool about it?
I liked seeing them go from one place to another and see that light come on, So yeah. Now later I taught high school, and I determined that was really my goal was high school. Elementary school kids, yeah, they're cool, but high school's awesome.
So you were there at St. Louis for 5 years, where you taught at this school.
So yeah, well, I taught for 5 years.
Okay, and it was at the same institution, or did you end up moving to a high school?
No.
In that time.
No, I had a baby.
Oh, okay, all right. When did you have a baby?
Where?
When?
When? Where? At a hospital.
Dummy.
So that was my son. So that was 1976.
Okay.
No, 75.
Okay, and so this was there in St. Louis.
Right,
And
right.
you were at Ladue. And
Well, I quit.
Oh, you quit?
Oh, yeah, because,
when you got pregnant?
Women did that.
Sure.
So I stayed home for the next 5 years. I had another baby, who's now grown up. Bought a house, refurbished the house. It was 80 years old, so we made it look really super, and all by ourselves. It was a lot of work. And then we moved to Memphis.
All right. Now, what about, so in terms of thinking about time, what was happening in St. Louis at that time? I mean, in the 1970s, was St. Louis as hopping as many other cities? Were you paying attention to the art? Was it?
I was paying more attention to the art at this point.
Because I mean, that's a ridiculous museum.
It is awesome. It is awesome. Now, I wish, looking back, I think, why didn't I go every week? I can't. I didn't, but I went a lot more, and it was available, so that was worthwhile.
Now, just out of curiosity, what were some things were there things at the St. Louis Art Museum that stick out in your head as being particularly great?
I saw a Matisse exhibit that was wonderful.
And they have that turtle painting.
Yeah.
That's one of my all-time favorite paintings.
It was, which was impressive. And I think there was a Jasper Johns exhibition, too, that was awesome.
And so, how far apart are your two children?
3 years.
Okay, so pretty close in terms of age. And so, you made that transition from being in the classroom to being at home with the kids.
Did I love it?
Yeah.
No.
Or I wasn't actually going to ask you if you liked it. I was going to ask you what that transition was like.
I was home with the kids far too long. I mean, my husband should have been home with the kids. I should have been out working. So there's that. I mean, we did okay, but little kids, yeah. So, there was a lot of taking the kids to the library, doing this, doing that. Now, Laura was only a year old when we moved. Actually, we moved on her birthday to Memphis, so she was still really young. But
now, what brought you to Memphis?
Okay, so my husband is friends with, well, we both were, with a couple that we'd met in California. They graduated from Brooks Institute together. So they moved to St. Louis too. He was a photojournalist with the Post-Dispatch. Post-Dispatch? Yeah. And anyway, so he was from Tennessee. They both were from Tennessee, and they decided they were going to open a business, a commercial industrial business in Memphis, Tennessee. So they wanted Paul to come along with them. And I encouraged him to do that because I was ready to do something different, and I was tired of staying home with the kids. So we moved to Memphis. Yeah, and he went into business with them.
No, I mean, to me, Memphis and St. Louis are they're buddies. They'd be on the same softball team in terms of the atmosphere in the city, the size of the city, the makeup of the city. It feels, to me, really similar. I mean, St. Louis, obviously.
So St. Louis, to me, is a more northern city.
Okay.
In fact, people would say, so when I was in St. Louis, people would say, oh, you're from the South. I said, no. When I moved here, people said, oh, you're from the North. So they couldn't figure out what to do with me.
So they were thinking that they sort of thought of Tulsa/Stillwater as being Southern.
Southern.
Okay.
Right.
That's interesting.
Well, there are a lot of people in Oklahoma that talk really, I don't know. It's that Okie twang kind of thing.
Okie from Muskogee.
Yeah.
Okay. And then also just to kind of like fill out the St. Louis years, was it mostly you and the kiddos, or was there a community there for you?
Oh, there was. We had a lot of friends. We did a lot of camping. That was cheap and easy, and ended up buying a VW camper, so we went all over the place, hauled Chris with us. It was good. Now, camping's not my favorite thing, but it was good for the time, so, yeah.
I love how there's like a couple of themes that are arising here. One is, you tell me that you got an A in the class.
I did.
So like in the same way that Brittany would be like timestamp 2019, you'd be like, and then I took a painting class and got an A in it. And then the other thing that is a reoccurring theme is, did I like it? I love that how you kind of throw that in there. It's like, did I like being in California? Yes. Did I like being in St. Louis at the house? No. I
like St. Louis.
Yeah, but the being in the house with the kids for that amount of time, you weren't. Yeah. But I like how these are the things that are popping up in my interview with Mary Kay. And so you end up making this transition to Memphis.
It's a big deal, actually.
And I mean, of course, it is. Yeah. It is a different kind of city. What were some things that you really noticed about it? P.S. Now we're talking about 1980.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And so you're making that transition in 1980 with your husband and your kids.
2 kids.
And so, and how many cats you got now? Timestamp. How many cats?
2, I think.
Okay.
But we ended up. At one point, there were 3. It gets kind of fuzzy as to how many we had, but Yeah.
And so you make the transition to Memphis. What did you notice about the city? How did it feel different?
We moved to Germantown, which the realtor that we hired only pointed us to Germantown. So that was probably never where we should have lived. We should have been in Midtown or someplace, but. So we never should have met because we really didn't fit in too much. Here I am, the artist, and my husband's the photographer, and whatever. But it was all about suburbia. Now my husband loved it because there were all these people and all these block parties, and my daughter started playing softball, and there, he just loved all that, chatting with the folks and so forth. And I was teaching then, first at Kirby and then at Germantown High School, and so I was busy with that. So, what did I know? I was not accustomed to, how can I say this? Southern kinds of views. A lot of the food I wasn't aware of either. Grits? Whoa, what is that? Barbecue, we did beef in Oklahoma. Pork here. The first time I picked up some to-go barbecue, I got home, it was all pink, and I thought I was going to die from trichinosis. And I called him and I said, I think there's something wrong with my order, And he said, where are you from? And I said, Oklahoma. He said, that's it. We do pork here. You do beef. These are pigs. It's fine.
Oh, that's so good.
It was funny. It was fun. So those kinds of, sometimes I got lost with the really Southern accent. I couldn't understand what people were saying. They probably couldn't understand me either. Yeah. And the racial aspect was totally different to me.
I would imagine it would be.
Yeah, it was.
No shade on Germantown, but Germantown in the 1980s,
oh, yeah, very
I'm
white.
sure was very white.
Very white, yeah.
And so you were teaching at Kirby.
I was, when it first opened.
Okay. And then what was that like?
It was great.
Because you had made the move from elementary, being at home with the kiddos, and then suddenly now you're teaching in high school.
So when Kirby first opened, it was 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. And then they dropped and added. So they dropped the first grade and added. So I had some of those kids, 6 years, 5 years, whatever it was, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I could have cheerfully shot them as middle schoolers, cheerfully. But, they turned out okay as high school folks, so same kids.
Yeah, it's funny.
They grew, obviously.
My mom has this story that she would sometimes say in front of me and my sister, and she would say, grandchildren are God's reward for not strangling your own children. And I say that about my drawing 2 students. I say drawing 2 is God's reward for not killing the drawing 1 students. And so I totally see what you're saying. But now, what was it? What was it like teaching? Because it's a totally different environment. It's a totally different age group.
Right.
It's a totally different city. What was that experience like?
So one of the main things. So by then, I pretty much had a curriculum. I mean, nobody said, "Here's the syllabus. Teach this." Mm-hmm. They said. Well, nobody really cared what I taught at Kirby High School. I mean, they really didn't. Just keep them out of the hallways and quiet. seemed to be the mandate. Oh, and do the yearbook. Yeah, you're in charge of the yearbook, which I didn't know anything about. But my main thrust was to try to make sure they didn't understand that this was the first year I'd ever taught high school. Because I figured I wouldn't have the respect then, So I worked at that. But they were good kids. And it was, as far as the racial makeup, it was pretty even, actually. I had really good students all the way around. I mean, I really did. I still see some of them, so yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, and so you were saying one of the things the main thing that you tried to do was make sure that they didn't think you were a rookie.
Exactly.
What were some things that you did to make sure that they didn't think you were a rookie?
Oh, I thought, so, I'd say things like, so when I was teaching in St. Louis, blah, 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 blah. I didn't say, when I was teaching 5-year-olds in St. Louis. I just let them assume. In fact, a group of us got together, it's been a couple years now, and they expressed this, surprise that I had never taught high school before. Well, you came off like you really knew what you were talking about. I said, yeah, I was just winging it.
And so this is in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about the things that you talked about in terms of what you noticed from your teachers before, not just in terms of how they would organize the class, but also the kinds of assignments that they would do, but also in terms of thinking about some of the things that you missed out on. So thinking about being able to look at art in a broader sense. What kind of things were you thinking about that you wanted to do differently than your teachers had done?
So, like I said, I didn't have much of a curriculum to follow. I mean, I really didn't. I just kind of made it up. So we started with line, went to shape, went all the way through, and that was with the Art 1 students. Then so one of the things I wanted to introduce was art history. So I planned it so that every unit that I taught had an art historical component. And I tried to throw in more contemporary work, which meant that I had to learn those kinds of things too, because that wasn't in my background. So yeah.
So how'd you teach yourself? How'd you do this? You went to the library?
Library.
Okay.
Library.
And
no computers. Library.
No Instagram. What did you find?
I found all these current people that I had not realized were there. And later that was reinforced when I took a class at University of Memphis. Dick Knowles, by the way, taught that. So then I found a whole bunch more people to include,
And so when you were teaching and you would go to the library, you'd go to the main public library, that kind of thing?
Or Germantown Library.
Okay, to the Germantown Library.
And they had a pretty complete collection for art.
And then what were some things that were exciting to you in terms of artists? I mean, I'm sure for me, as a teacher, sometimes I'm like, oh man, my students are going to love this. I don't like them that much, but my students are going to love them. And then I have the people that I really love that I know my students are going to not like. And so really what I'm curious about are what are some things that were exciting in both of those categories for you? What were some things that you were excited about sharing with the students and for yourself?
So I think more conceptual work, which just blew their minds, So now this was later on when I was at Germantown. For my Art 1 classes, when we did the unit online, I always showed the video, the making of The Running Fence by Christo, which is an awesome video. Although I tend to hum that song for the rest of my life afterwards. And they were just astounded that could be art, for starters, that it took so many years to realize that project, that it was only up for a short period of time, and how could that be right? And, those kinds of things which they never ever thought about. So I would say, okay, so say we want to make an art project out of a building here at Germantown High School. Now this is at Germantown. So we want to cover it like they did the Reichstag. All right. So first of all, we have to get the material. We have to get permission. We have to get this. And oh my gosh, there's probably a cockroach that might be harmed if we cover up the school for, 2 weeks or whatever. That got them to thinking how much was involved in his projects. So, yeah.
And I mean, part of the thing that is interesting to me about teaching is the stuff that you've already talked about, where you watch them
Oh yeah.
come alive,
Right.
or
Right.
they light up. I think you said light up, and so
they find their passion, which is just awesome to see.
Now, how was it that you framed, like you were talking about the thing with the running fence? What were some other things that were interesting or good for you to use as illustrations? P.S. I'm obviously asking because I want to know, because that sounds like a great thing to have in my back pocket. What were some other artists that you used as the gateway drug for them?
I don't know that I can. So one of the things at Germantown was I would assign every student in the class, like from Art 2 on up, a particular artist. And I did the assigning because everyone would pick Picasso. I mean, they just would, And even if they didn't understand that. So I would assign a contemporary living artist to each student to research and write up a paper and then present it to the class. So that was kind of new and different because we covered a whole bunch of folks then, and a lot more women, which I was very careful to include a lot of women in that too, because, everybody thought it was a bunch of old dead guys. So,
So who were some people that you assigned?
Kiki Smith, Eva Hesse, just like that whole Lee Bonacu, just whole bunches of folks.
Right.
So.
And also,
I ran into some trouble, though.
How did you run into trouble?
So, I'm in Germantown, pretty conservative. So I inadvertently, I didn't inadvertently, I gave this one kid, he was a baseball player, this particular individual who, in his readings, he discovered the guy was gay. Mm. Well, that just blew his mind. So here he is trying to give his report, and he every 2 sentences he says, "I can't believe he's gay. I can't believe I'm reading this. I can't believe." Now that's the only time that ever happened. But
now, who was that? Who was the gay person? Not the baseball player.
I don't remember his name. So I'm trying to think. Edward Hopper? I don't know. That's probably not right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'd have to look back and determine. It was the image that he showed was this guy in a bathtub, nude in a bathtub. Mm. So I'd have to look up and see exactly who that was.
Okay. Well, I mean,
but that wasn't the thing is that wasn't the normal image. Like if you we couldn't Google back then, but if you Googled, that wouldn't have come up.
Right.
All this other stuff would have. So I was a bit surprised too.
Well, I mean, to me, one of the things that I think is really interesting, I mean, you were talking about it, and, you're the generation before me, but then several people that I've talked to have talked about how, like you were talking about being around queer people in the Department of Art there at OSU, and I mean, I'm sure that some of my classmates at University of Memphis were gay, and I'm sure that I know that some of the people at my high school were queer, but they were not out, and so
goodness, no.
And so my understanding of that was it was an alien thing, and I remember reading the biography of Keith Haring after he died, and I think gay people and AIDS were really just punchlines to jokes.
Exactly.
And I didn't know. I of course, in 2024, Hamlet can say, "Oh, well, of course, my uncle was gay, and of course, Bobby was gay, or whatever." But then, when I was reading this biography, it really was, not necessarily like this baseball player who was saying, "I can't believe I'm reading this," but it was certainly a world, that was totally different from mine, right. And one that I had never encountered in reading before, right. Or in movies or right. in anything, and so it really was kind of
just
this,
wasn't too. Nobody talked about anything, so,
right? But also for me, I knew that I loved Keith Haring's work. I knew that this work was great and that it was super exciting, and I knew that he was friends with Andy Warhol and Jean-Michel Basquiat and all of this stuff, right. And so it was kind of one of those things where like, oh well, here's this person and they make this work that I really like and they have this great story, and so that was the entryway, and so I like how you talked about that. Who were some, and then also I'm curious, you were talking about assigning and you were like, of course Eva Hesse, duh, Lee Bontekoe, duh, but I'm curious, what was it about those people that you gravitated towards? What was it about their work that you were really interested in?
So those folks I mentioned were pretty instrumental in my MFA thesis. The work that I did for my MFA. So I studied a lot. Now we had a computer, so that was easier to do. So, but yeah. So.
And what was it about? Let's say Eva Hesse. What is it about Eva Hesse? Let's pretend I don't know who she is. Tell me about why you like her.
So, German, died really young.
Wait, are you German?
No.
Oh. Oh, okay.
She was.
Oh, yeah, but what was it? What was it about her work that you liked? What was it where you were like, "What? This is great"?
Oh, I like the materials that she used, even though they probably killed her. But multiples, the sexuality of them. Some are on the floor, like the multiples. So maybe one would stand alone and be okay, but a whole group of 20 or 30, much nicer, How she transferred her drawings that she made into three-dimensional kinds of things, how they would fly off the wall or hang or those kinds of things. But no, she's awesome. She's awesome.
Yeah, I love her.
And one of the things about her, a lot of artists, you think, oh, Jackson Pollock, I could never make that. But you look at some of Hesse's work and you think, I could probably copy that. Maybe not as well, but close, So she was, I think, very generous in the way she produced her work that you could relate to it really, really well. I love her work.
And so you were at Kirby for how long?
5 years.
5 years. And then you shifted to Germantown.
20 years.
Okay. And you were at Germantown for 20 years.
Yep.
And so at what point was it that you became involved in the community here in town? Was it when you went back to school for your MFA?
Yeah.
Now, when was this?
So I started at the University of Memphis in 1995. Very specifically remember that because I used to host recruiters from schools, art schools around the country. They would come into my classroom. There were 4 art teachers at the time, and nobody wanted to take class time out for these folks, so they said, we'll just send our kids up to you, Mary Kay, and you, the host, the presenter. So it was from all over the place. Pratt and Chicago, everybody came. I don't know if they still do that or not. It was great. But so they used to come to my classroom, and I felt it was worthwhile for my students to see what kids were doing that weren't that much older. Also, they would look over their portfolios, and they would give them advice on that. So I thought that was a win-win. As a result of doing that, I was invited to a teacher fly-in at Maryland Institute College of Art. So they paid for everything for a long weekend. They flew me there, they fed me, they put me in a hotel. We did all this stuff. It was so wonderful. And so I was touring the student work, their art spaces and the galleries and so forth, and I kept thinking to myself, I want to do that. I don't want to teach that. I want to do that. So when I came back from that fly-in, which a couple of my students did graduate from there, but later, um, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to graduate school. So by now the kids are older. My husband's situated and doing his own thing, and what the heck? And I have a little money. So
Now, before you do that, are you also, like, while you're teaching and in St. Louis and before that, are you making stuff?
I am.
Okay.
Oh yeah, always make stuff.
So
yeah.
what kind of stuff are you making?
So, well, some of the stuff was examples for students, but also I was, sending my work off to various juried shows and so forth, and they were maybe collages, figures, particularly, maybe some paintings, prints, this kind of thing. Mostly 2D though.
Now, what kind of collages are you making?
So,
or were you making at the time?
So I would take paper and paint it in various gray tones. And then from those figure drawing classes that I had here and there, and art teachers are always doing little workshops and so forth. So there'd be a figure workshop. So I'd take that and I would tear the various shapes of the different grayscale kinds of things, and I would create a figure out of that. So, I think Delta Arts, whatever, hung one of those one time. It's been a long time ago. I don't know. So.
And now, what was it that felt appealing about collage?
Oh, I love collage. Collage is great.
And that was something that you had always enjoyed?
Sure. So I really haven't talked about it too much about my own work, but I was always producing, always. I wasn't necessarily sending it to shows or anything or hanging it up. Well, maybe in the house, but I always made stuff. And I always made stuff as examples for the students too. So,
Now, what kind of stuff were you making to be around the house? What kind of things?
So there were paintings, and some smaller pieces, and of course those collages and so forth. Now there was a one point where there wasn't much on the walls at all. It was kind of scary looking back. I think, whoa, how come I didn't hang up something? Because I had plenty. So I don't know.
Now, did you have a situation where you were able to have a basement or an attic space? It was really just kind of what you could fit in the house.
It was what I could do at work, at school.
I see.
I had a big classroom, so I would work after school. More appropriately, I'd work on the weekends. So I had key to the building, so I could go and work. So yeah, and like I said, the kids were older. Paul was doing, Paul things.
Okay, so you're working at school, kind of after school, and then on the weekends, and you were talking about the collages and the paintings as well. Also oil.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you able
Prints.
to do the oil and the prints at school?
I was. Yeah, we did a lot of oil sticks. I did that with my students. They did some awesome work. You might not be able to do that these days, with all those concerns over toxicity. But back then, yeah, they didn't worry about it, or that I knew of. Nobody died.
Now, how would you describe the kinds of things that you were making? I mean, you were saying figurative stuff. And by now you had kind of moved away from the abstraction.
Right.
What kinds of things were you thinking about with these figurative pieces? Was it more about getting the image right? Was it more about the feel or the relationship or the concept? What was happening?
So, probably all those things. The feel, so less regimented, less static, a freer movement, mark making, those kinds of things. A project that I did with the students, which I also did myself, was my husband took the kids fishing. My son, who's older than my daughter, didn't catch anything, nor did my husband, but my daughter caught 32 fish.
What?
So they put them on the ice and brought them home, and at that point I thought, oh my gosh, I'll take those fish to school and we'll all paint them. So we did. And I had them on a platter, and they were beautiful. Of course, they were still intact fish, I mean, they weren't gutted or anything. but they were beautiful, and all different sizes. And I laid them out on some going, some whatever, and we all drew them, and then we painted them, and then later we made prints from those drawings and so forth. I mean, so I got a lot of mileage out of those fish. But then at night, after class was over, can't just leave them in the classroom. I covered them all up, put them in a sack, and I put them in the freezer in the janitorial staff had an office, so I put it in there. And I asked him, I said, "You can look if you want, it's fish." Anyway, so the kids and I made some absolutely wonderful works that hung at Brooks and the Scholastic show later. Not mine, but theirs.
Now, you were saying that you guys would also make prints.
Yeah.
What was the print setup there? What did they have?
So I bought a press the art money bought a press, small one. So we did that, but we also did linocuts. We also did monotypes. So yeah, we got our mileage out of those fish. That was for sure.
Well, to me,
that was fun.
That sounds
fun.
like a lot of resources in terms of the school being able to have presses or a press. I mean, that's a huge deal. And then also the space to have a press.
Well, see, I had plenty of space. So my room had been 2 rooms, something about you can't have a dead-end hallway, so they had to open it up. OSHA got all bent out of shape, the fire department, somebody, I don't know. So they made it one big room. It was really 2. So I had lots and lots of room. And as far as the money goes, you see, Germantown High School art teachers heavily involved in the fine arts department and the plays. So I don't know if you know Germantown High School and the theater department there, but I mean, we rivaled Broadway. Truly we did. And so eventually, I did posters with the kids and whatever, and eventually I was the department chair, and then I was also in charge of designing the set for the plays. So I'd make them a little maquette, and then the students and I would create that on the stage. It was a big deal. Lots of nights and weekends, unpaid.
Now, you were saying that you had made these trips with the sponsored by Micah or whoever.
Right.
And you mentioned earlier...
Just that one trip. The rest of them, the representative came to my classroom. So.
Okay. And then I think at some point you mentioned earlier that you guys would travel and go camping and go out. Was that something that you was going to other cities? Was that a part of your life while you were in St. Louis or while you were in Memphis?
St. Louis and Memphis both, but we didn't go, we camped in campgrounds and so forth.
So it wasn't like you would go to Nashville and then see the museum or go to some other place for the museum. Okay. And then, so you make this decision to go back to school.
Yeah.
P.S. Congratulations. We're moving right along in terms of your timeline here. And so you were saying 1995, you decided to start going to Memphis, University of Memphis. And what was it? That's a huge transition in terms of being a full-time art teacher.
I was still a full-time art teacher.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
And so how did you navigate that?
So backtrack just a smidge. So my first thought was Memphis College of Art. I'll go there. They were always really, really good to my students and myself. We did life drawings. I took my high school students to draw nude studies through Memphis College of Art, which was kind of a biggie. I had to get all sorts of permission, but I did. When it worked out well. So that was my first thought, I'll go there. Well, I talked with the president, whoever that was at the time, and he told me flat out no. If I wasn't willing to go to school full time, then I couldn't go there. That wasn't, the way they approach things. You would have to dedicate your whole life, to art, so you couldn't just go part-time. Well, I said, I've got a family. How am I going to afford this, So, but University of Memphis, they would let me go part-time. I don't know if they still will, but that was amazing. So I spent 5 years working on my MFA at the University of Memphis.
Now, you were in Memphis for a good amount of time before you
Prior
went
to
back
that.
to get your MFA.
Right.
Was going out and seeing art and doing that kind of thing,
Yeah.
was that really important with you as well?
It was. So Memphis has the Dixon. They have, the Brooks, the Metal Museum. I'm not sure when. Has that always been there? I don't know. But, so I would go, and occasionally I'd haul the kids with me. Now, my husband was never so interested in that. But yeah, we would tour those, and we'd talk about art and so forth,
And then also, I mean, you were talking about taking your students to go and do drawing at MCA. I would imagine that also, I mean, I think most of my early experiences in terms of going to the Brooks or going to the Dixon was in high school.
Right.
And so were you also
we did
doing
that.
that kind of
Yeah,
thing with
yeah.
your students?
And to galleries. We would go to David Lusk Gallery or whatever, too, with students.
Mm-hmm.
Now, usually the art club, so those were kids that were dedicated.
Okay.
More so.
And I know sometimes when teachers will take classes to an institution of one kind or another, sometimes there'll be a docent who's there to talk about it, but I also know a lot of times it's the teacher who is doing a lot of that bridge building between the students and this wild and crazy art that they're seeing maybe for the first time. What were some things that you remember in terms of being that bridge builder for them?
So I think like contemporary art, particularly conceptual art, was always a mind blower to that. And it was hard for them to understand it. Well, it's hard for a lot of people to understand it. So that took some time. Now, at the time, Brooks wasn't featuring too much, conceptual art, but it changed over time. And sometimes the galleries, though, were. David Lusk was showing more. So I always prepared kids before we went. This is how you act in a gallery, and this is don't touch, and don't run, and don't, whatever, do those kinds of things. And they were always pretty good. They really were. So, yeah.
And I mean, in the same way, I'm curious about how, you built that bridge for the students in terms of thinking about the running fence with Christo and how that worked. Can you remember any examples of sometimes that either you took the students to David Lusk or you took them to the Brooks or some other space where there was something in particular that you talked about that was interesting for you and for the students?
I don't know. I don't know if I can think of anything specific.
It's like a total pop quiz question.
So, truly, that wasn't on the thing, the memo. Now, a big deal may not sound such a big deal to you, but think Germantown High School, a bunch of juniors and seniors going as a group to Memphis College of Art. We walk in the door. We've got our drawing materials. The model comes in, takes off her robe, or his, and we start drawing. That was a big deal. I don't think anybody had done that in a high school setting at all prior to my doing that. I could be wrong. But of course I had to get permission from everybody in the world. And when I mentioned this to the curriculum coordinator, I thought he was going to pass out. He just turned totally white. Really, I thought he was going to pass out. He said, "Mary Kay, do you know who's on the board?" I said, "Yeah, does it matter?" But he said, "Okay." He said, "You do the paperwork. You get everybody's permission." I had forms filled out, parents' signatures. Then I called the parents to make sure those weren't those were valid. Only one time did I call a parent, and there was this long, I said, this involves a nude model. And there was this long silence, and I thought, oh my gosh, he forged his mom's name. She said, "No, I know I signed it, but I've changed my mind." So he didn't get to go. But there was never a problem. And then we'd have these, and a lot of kids use them in their portfolios for AP work. So yeah. So
just out of curiosity, so here you are, you're at Germantown, even in the 1990s, I
Right.
would imagine, maybe not today, but in the 1990s, I would imagine that was still a very conservative place to be.
Oh, gosh.
How was it one of those things where the students were like, of course, that sounds great? Or was there some bridge building that you needed to do in terms of getting the students to understand the importance of this?
So the reason this all started in the first place is the art club, the president of the art club, a name you would know if I said it, because he's a local artist. Anyway, so we had a suggestion box. He said, we need to get more people and do more stuff and whatever. So the only suggestion that was ever put in there was, we need to draw naked people. And so this kid was so put out. He said, oh, I said, I don't know. That might be a thought. And that's how it started.
That's interesting.
It is.
And
it
I also
is.
like how they said naked.
Oh, yeah. Oh, naked.
Right.
Yeah. Now, so we had a succession, so I did that for years and years and years. And like I said, Memphis College of Art, Susan Miller was wonderful to set everything up for me. So, and we paid the model ourselves, So, but every time we get a new vice principal, I would have to tell that person what we were doing. Sometimes I would forget. Then I'd say, oh, by the way, we went to a life drawing, I always called it life drawing class the other day. I just wanted you to know. What is that? Well, so at one point, the vice principal said, oh my gosh, no, all those models are prostitutes. I said, no, not really, they're students. Well, anyway. So, but then I took a whole big thing to Ernest Chisholm. I don't know if you know Ernest Chisholm, good old boy. He was the principal. And so I laid out all my, things to convince him, because the vice principal told me I could never do that again. And to convince him, and he looked at me, he says, who's the principal of this high school? I said, you are. He says, don't worry about it. Anybody ever complain? I said, nope. As long as they don't complain, it's fine with me. So we kept doing a couple times a year we do that.
Now, going back to school for you, so you're established at this point. You've been teaching for a number of years in Memphis. And so you decide to go back to school or go to school. And it's not to get a master's of education, but it's to go back to get a degree in fine arts.
Right.
What was some of the motivation for you? I mean, you were talking about going to MICA and saying, oh, I want to do this.
Yeah.
Was it solely that?
That was the big turning point. That was like, you could do this, Mary Kay. You could do this. So it wasn't going to work out with MCA, but University of Memphis said, sure, we've even got a little stipend you can apply for every year. So not a stipend, a grant. So it took me 5 years. I took a course every semester. I paid as I went, so I had no debt at the end. Worked really, really hard. A lot of weekends, mostly weekends, but some nights. I would be, after I taught all day, I was pretty tired, couldn't, think too much. But the motivation was not for money, but for myself. So fellow teachers would say, why are you doing that? You have to go all that 60 hours? You can get a master's in education for half that time, half that money, half that everything. I said, but yeah, I don't want to learn about education. Did that once, and it wasn't fun. I want to make art, and this is how I want to do it.
And you think, I mean,
oh, it was a turning point.
I mean, to me, that seems like it's almost like a
fairy tale,
an unfinished task. Like you were talking before about being in school at OSU and then changing paths during that.
Yep.
Did you at the time also see it as that, or was that is this just 2024 Mary Kay telling the story?
So I changed from fine arts, painting, in undergraduate to art education, thinking that would be a short time. I would do this just long enough to get him through school, and then I'd go paint on the beach or whatever one does. And it turned out that I liked teaching, and I liked the students, and I was pretty good at it. So I thought, okay, keep going, and then I was interrupted with having children for a few years. But,
Sure.
But yeah, so when we moved here, that's what I did. I applied and was hired, and, then eventually I retired. So.
And that brings us to today.
Today.
At the end, Hamlet. So just so you can pace yourself,
Okay.
we got about 6 more minutes
Six
we're going to
minutes?
do
Oh my
this.
gosh.
And so we're obviously not going to finish. But I am curious.
I got out of high school,
You
though.
mentioned, way to go, congratulations. And you got all the way up to 1996, which is better than anybody else. What do you said I was pretty good at it in terms of being a teacher.
I was.
I'm just curious, I think you're the first one that I've interviewed. I'll talk to whoever and I'll say, like, you were a really good teacher. What made you really good? And they'd be like, well, I showed up every day and I had a parking spot that was kind of close to the school, and then that would be it. But I think you're much more aware of your skills and much more aware of what it was that you did as a teacher. Right. And it also sounds like you have a really great relationship with a lot of your former students. And I'm sure a lot of your former students have said, Mary Kay, the reason you're so badass is because of this and this and this. Yeah. And so just, and it's also not tooting your own horn. This is just being for real. What do you think? Why did you feel like you were a good teacher?
So in high school, those little elementary school kids, they're cute. I mean, they're nice. They're sweet. But they don't know anything. I mean, they can't decide which side of the chair to sit to get in, And so I had lots of patience. I do have lots of patience. But when I got to the high school, I thought, aha, I have found my group of folks. So I think one of the things is that I always liked those high school people, always. Even with all their, every day was drama, every day. Somebody broke up, somebody whatever, oh my gosh, crashed my car, there was always something going on. But also they knew that I expected the very best of them, and so, whatever they could do, whatever I could help them with. And they tried really hard. So they were good, they were really good people. And I had passion for what I was teaching, which I think they saw also, especially when I was in graduate school. I'd learn all this stuff. And so I'd take it right back to my students, and I'd say, okay, today we're going to talk about, and they'd go, oh, she's been to another lecture, or she's seen another artist, or, she's learned a new but they just go right ahead with it, So I think that helps. Anytime you love what you're doing, I used to tell my students when they'd say, I don't know what to do. My folks want me to be a doctor. I want to do that, whatever. I said, every day you're going to go to work. You have to love that. You don't want to ever, say, oh, I can't bear it. I can't bear it. And I always kept thinking that I would say that about teaching, but I never did. So, yeah.
And what is it? One of the things that I'm interested about with this conversation with you is that you have so many different facets where you are particularly passionate, so like I can imagine an artist sitting down and listening to this and listening to your story. I can imagine someone who is not involved in arts at all listening to your story. But then also I'm thinking about a lot of my students who are also art ed, who are really thinking about this opportunity as a person to fit in other people's lives. And I think a lot of times, in the hierarchy of University of Memphis or any other educational institution, it's always like, it's got to be the art, it's got to be the artist, But then so many of these conversations that I've had with other artists, for sure, a pivotal person is that high school art teacher, and I've run across way more people who have said that was the turning point for me, as opposed to, I met some artist, or I love somebody's work. Of course, that's a part of the story, but it's really that high school art teacher that is so powerful and so important. And, I think also for in your case, I think you're aware of that. I mean,
Sure.
I think you know how important that is.
Yeah.
Um,
I have the little thank you notes to prove it.
right. And so, what do you think? Like, at what point did you begin having these continued connections with your students after they graduated? Was this a thing that was there from the very beginning when you were at Kirby?
So I still hear from folks from Kirby. Mm-hmm. So it's Facebook. I mean, it's social media. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they look me up. Mm-hmm. Like, hi, Miss Van, how you do? Whatever, and then we chat back and forth, and they do things, and I applaud them, and maybe they're in town, and mm-hmm. they come to my house and search out those mosquitoes and those from the AAA mm-hmm. bug company, so.
And are there other things that you can think of? I mean, to me, it seems like one of the things that you're talking about and demonstrating is this kind of passion.
Right.
And also a pleasure in doing this job. And I think a lot of times students will see that.
Right.
And they'll obviously connect with that. And they'll obviously, I mean, I think one of the other things that you said is that you have high expectations.
I do.
And I know that's also really something that can tap into students, or that students can respond to,
right.
In a way. Because I think one of the other things that comes up a lot in these interviews, that's my alarm to tell us to stop, is a kind of competitive nature, of students. Or artists who talk about like, oh, I wanted my drawing to be really good, or I wanted my teacher to talk about my drawing,
right.
and also like that person really pushed me really hard, like that kind of thing. And I think, I hear you talking about that, and that seems really powerful. And then also the thing that you were saying, you said not their best friend, but and you were kind of talking about like the kind of relationship that you
right.
would have with your
right.
student, where it's not totally administrative or academic, but there's kind of like this in between.
Right. I had a student one time who thought that, he said, he wanted to call me his friend. I said, not really, I'm your teacher. No, but all my teachers are my friends. I said, so you want to go hang out at the mall with me tomorrow? Oh, no. He said, I don't want to do that. I said, then we can't be friends. Teachers, I will support you in whatever, but we can't be friends. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like an okay place to pause.
Okay.
I mean, because I have a lot of questions about grad school and that
right.
kind of thing, but we can do that another time if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay.
And that's have we turned off?
I'll turn it off here.
And that was the first of 2 interviews I recorded with Mary K VanGieson. That interview was recorded on March 30th, 2024. There was a point in the interview where Mary K blanked on the name of an artist that she assigned to a student. And I'm not going to give it to you now. I'm going to make you wait until next week, when we have the part 2 of 2 interviews with Mary K VanGieson. Until then, thank you for listening.